Yeah, and systems thinking is just a way of thinking. It can be an approach to help when things get messy. And the interesting thing is, so when you boil it down in short, it's kind of a mindset and a toolbox of thinking. Yeah, when situations are getting messy, and that's the first step is the thinking.
Hello and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abbie, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Christian Barron as we take a communication perspective on exploring systems, perspectives, and complexity. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we are making and how we are making it through our communication practices. It means seeing ourselves as active participants with choices about how we show up to each other. It is paying attention to patterns, context, stories, and relationships to better understand how meaning gets made. It is embodying curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to co-create better social worlds. So, whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the idea is that by looking at communication instead of through it, in this conversation and in all that we do, we expand our collective imagination through both storytelling and story hearing, revealing new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Christian Barron. Christian is a consultant, trainer, and systemic coach. He uses systems thinking to make complexity manageable, with a specific focus on clarity, collaboration, and lasting impact, something you will definitely hear about today. What I would have you keep in mind as you join us in this conversation is that word I've already mentioned a couple times in this intro, what exploring looks like to you. There's a moment in this conversation where the idea of exploring goes from, well, an idea to a practice. And we talk about the reality of exploring, how that can be over a long period of time. It cannot be fun all the time. It can be challenging depending on who your, conversation partners are and how willing they are to, co-create better social worlds with you. So something I'm hoping that can add an additional layer of value to listening to this conversation is for you to reflect on your own relationship to exploration. Maybe that applies in a number of different areas of your life, and that's valuable to think about, but particularly your kind of relational or conversational exploration. How do you play? How do you try new things? How do you create new things together? What does that look like to you? So with that in mind, let's begin the conversation with Christian. Hello, Christian. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Hi, Abbie.
It's wonderful to be here with you. I've been really looking forward to this, especially as this is the first episode of 2026 and season 5 of the podcast. To kick us off, as always, I'll have us both answer how we are arriving. I'll go first to give you a moment to think about your answer. I always say I'm excited, and it's always true, but it's probably getting repetitive for people. But like I said, with this being the first episode of the year, there's an additional level of excitement there, as well as mystery, I would say, to use the CMM-ish terms. You could maybe call it uncertainty as well, but mystery seems a little more hopeful, just that I'm not yet sure what all the conversations I'll be having, who my conversation partners will be for this whole season. And so there's a lot of unknowns still about how this season will unfold. But context I'm bringing with me to this conversation in particular that I think is relevant to share is that there's a lot of ways in which I see this episode as a continuation of other conversations I've already been having, because people will recognize the themes of systems thinking from other conversations I've had. And so I think I keep kind of returning to that and keep wanting to have conversations with people like you who have made it, their life's work. And this is what you're grounded in, is this systems perspective, because I find it to be really rich, intriguing on its own, and also important to combine with my communication perspective, because I know, for me at least, because I studied interpersonal communication. Now it's my full-time job. It's what I do outside of my job, my personal life. It's what we're all doing. I can get really maybe hyper zoomed in because the interpersonal communication is about this, the one-on-one, the turns of the conversation, the words that are said, the bifurcation points of how things change, how we create our social
Absolutely.
worlds in these small moments, which is really meaningful and valuable to look at. But it's, I think, also important to not, for me at least, and others, to not get stuck in that perspective. And so a systems perspective, which feels like it could be the opposite of something as, small as a communication perspective, but really go hand in hand really nicely, because CMM says it's our communication that creates our social worlds. That's a little bit of a nod to the relationship between the interpersonal communication and the systems that we're a part of. And so there's this, reciprocal dynamic of our communication creates our social worlds, but then our social worlds also shape the way we show up to each other. So there's a really interesting relationship there that I think, again, because I'm all about like the practice of how are we showing up in our day-to-day relationships, understanding that dynamic, I think opens up a lot of possibilities. And I think you maybe have that same perspective as well. So those are kind of some of the thoughts that I'm bringing with me today, having had some previous conversations about systems thinking, but excited to step into a new part of this conversation with you today as well. So Christian, how are you arriving?
Yeah, thank you very much, Abby, for this nice introduction. Already your thoughts. I'm first of all happy to be here, and thanks for having me. And how am I arriving? I'm pretty curious also where this conversation is going to, and I would like to see where this brings us and your thoughts and how we bring this all together. And you said some things at the beginning already, like adding up on something. And I see there is no right or wrong here. There's no right or wrong on certain types of thinking. This is your own thinking and your own mind, and this is totally fine and totally okay. And I'm happy to build up on that and to start this conversation with you.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that that's a great place to start as well, and is important. That's something I do mention when I'm talking about CMM to people who are unfamiliar with it, that, like you're saying, that language of right or wrong is really not part of the conversation at all. That's, very much a value judgment that we're just not making, and we're just bringing curiosity. And so, because what I'm most excited to talk with you about today is your upcoming book is about all these different methods, I think that's a very generous invitation to saying, hey, there's not a right or wrong way. Here's a bunch of different ways, and you pick what makes sense for you. So before we get into that, though, Christian, would you mind saying a little bit more about yourself, introducing us by sharing the story you tell about yourself, or anything that feels relevant to you for us to know as we go into this hour together today?
Yeah, thank you very much. You gave me that question before, and I was thinking about it, and I say, why should I decide on telling the listeners what I believe? I was turning it around and say like, okay, what could be interesting for the listeners to know about me? And I asked my partner, and I said, okay, what would be interesting for the listeners? And her thoughts mostly aligned with the thoughts I had. And what it is basically I'm a trained engineer from my background. So was years ago, and I was in science and all of that. And then I discovered, okay, the machines and the technical things, this is going quite well, right? The interesting part is the people. And I can tell you later more about this, how I got into all of this people work. But this is where I am today, mostly working in social systems and training and consulting and coaching people and working together with them to make work a good place.
Yeah, I'll take you up on that offer right away. Please tell me more. What was that transition like, going from working with machines to people?
Yeah, that's the typical thing when you say you're an engineer. People don't think about they don't typically think about in the beginning about that you're now up for conflicts and tricky work situations and all of that. However, I had the chance in science. You have a typical academic pathway, and then you have the chance to have a leading position and so forth. And I had the chance to work with people who were in the institute for like 35 years. Yeah. And there's now this new guy coming, who is also 30 years younger than all of the people working there. And that sometimes created quite funny, interesting situations, I would say, and sometimes also tense situations, which is totally normal and which was totally fine at that point and is still today totally fine. And I went went deep into that, um, yeah, to get a feeling for people and a feeling for myself. How am I feeling in that situation? And sometimes you feel a tension, right? And that was the moments where I said, okay, well, there's something going wrong. My feeling tells me I should approach this person because I don't know, there's something in the air. Yeah. And there was clearly something, and this person was quite, I would say, afraid that because there was restructuring, when a new person is coming, they always have like a certain idea of how things are going, and I wanted to make life easy for people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the end, I figured in that conversation later that this person was afraid that something is getting taken away. Yeah, and this is totally normal as well. And this opened my eyes, and I was just listening for quite a time. And the situation totally changed from being more like a quiet space in the beginning to like people and the team evolving together in being like really successful and really working well together. And that was the moment where I said, okay, well, maybe the more fun part for me and interesting part is actually the people, because you can't predict all of these things and they make their own reality. And that's where it gets interesting. Yeah. And so that was the point. That was 15 years ago, where it changed from a bit the technical side to a more people side, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Which is not exclusive, right? It goes all together, right? I'm still technical companies, and it's sometimes good to have a technical background, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so thinking about how your introduction to all of this was really rooted in practice and in just your, literal, real day-to-day interactions and beginning to understand what was made. Now that you've introduced yourself, I wonder if you'd introduce us to your new book that's coming out, and kind of in terms of your story and how it evolved out of your own experience to be so focused on practical applications of systems thinking.
I would like to begin with thinking, if that's okay. Yeah. There's many ways of thinking. And the people can first of all decide themselves how they think and what they do, yeah. And what it basically is a mental process, yeah, to make sense of information, yeah, to guide an action, things like that. And there's many different types of thinking. Some are for quick fixes. Some are for looking to a longer period, seeing how things are connected, perspectives, etc. And they're all fine. Yeah, and systems thinking is just a way of thinking in a way, and it can be an approach to help when things get messy. And the interesting thing is, so when you boil it down in short, so please, all of the theorists now close their eyes or close their ears. I would say like it's kind of a mindset and a toolbox of thinking. Yeah, when situations are getting messy, and that's the first step is the thinking. But when you want to bring the thinking into action, then you need something to start. And that's what is the point where what I see when working and with my customers is like they want a place to start. They don't want to dive into theory for a certain time, and systems thinking and the theory behind it is well worth to study, and it's really really interesting. At some point, it may be relevant, even when you want to really dive deep. But for most practitioners I'm working with, it's like they want to start, and they want a starting point, and they want a guidance, and they want somewhere. Give me the first steps, and this is what I'm doing. Giving the first steps as an invitation to start.
Yeah. I hear some language in what you're saying that's familiar to me in terms of when your work is so deeply rooted in theory and scholarship, and there's some people that are really attached to that's kind of, what I'm hearing you allude to, okay, theorists, close your ears right now. You're not going to want to hear this like boiled down version, because a lot of people are very committed. And I know, especially in the systems thinking world, there's like so many different approaches to how you talk about systems thinking. And I think the same is true for communication as well. And so my hope, and I would think that yours is too, is that it's not like blasphemous to try to kind of quote unquote translate all of this rich theory into practice that is tangible and accessible for people, because it can feel like boiling it down. It can feel like simplifying. And I think word that stuck with me that I was introduced to actually at the Relating Systems Thinking and Design Conference in 2025, one of the online sessions I attended, someone introduced me to the word simplexity. And I really liked that because from my perspective, the CMM theory, it is incredibly complex because it has to be if it wants to say anything real and helpful about, admittedly, a very complex social world and very complex processes of communication. And I want to find a way to make it simple so that it is accessible. I don't want to erase the complexity, but there's value in the simplicity. And so I just really liked that idea of that, made it feel like it didn't have to be one or the other, that there can be simplicity in the complexity and complexity in the simplicity.
I would have noted down 2 points when you were talking, and I would like to comment on this. First, the first one was theory, and the other one was simple. And I will add something to simple. There's a certain quote. There's not sure from whom this quote is, but it says there's nothing more practical than a good theory, and there's actually something behind it, because a theory and a good theory is typically backed by evidence, so experiments.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so there is practical things, and when it doesn't work out, you will see like, okay, this theory doesn't hold up. So it all has its validation. Sometimes when we talk about evidence, there's certain types of evidence. Some are more in an informed way, some more in an academic sense, where you can rigorously test some of these things, some more rooted in daily life. So this is like a daily life informed. I would say that is evidence informed as well. So just to get that a bit with the theory chapter, so it's totally valid. I got your point, what you were saying, but just to not leave this away from the conversation, theory is important. And there's many good theories out there, and this is where we're building all of that based on with systems thinking and all of these other related fields. And then I had your thoughts about simple and complex, and I like this very much, because simple, there's nothing wrong about simple and complex and all of that, and it's just how we perceive a situation at that point, maybe, or how the whole situation is constructed, and we believe it is. And what often comes into play is, or what I think about now is like the interplay of simple and oversimplification. Or
say more about
or
that.
simple simplification and oversimplification in reducing some of the things really, really rigorously. I'm not saying too much, because that's up for, you lose. When you reduce something, you lose something, which is, this is a trade-off. Yeah. So simple, I think it's first of all, it's just a word. It's as well also how you describe certain things.
Yeah.
And it maybe gets dangerous if you oversimplify, which the over already says. But again, that's again a perspective from somebody saying this was oversimplified or reduced to an extent where it lost a certain degree of exactness or scientific exactness.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I love what you're saying. And it's made me think of an additional distinction I want to make about what we're saying here, is that I think, again, coming from my communication perspective, which again is focused on the meaning making that we're doing, it's less about, what is and more about what is being made together, what our, reality is, what our truth is, not like what the truth is. And so I kind of want to like, yes, and to what you've said of yes, like you're saying, there is practice and theory, and there is theory and practice, and you really can't separate those. Some people would try. What I'm more curious about, I think, in what I was trying to say about complexity, simplicity, translation, is in the, when I kind of, I don't know how to say this in the best way, but, so the name of the theory I work with is coordinated management of meaning. And that is such a mouthful. And I can sense that some people who are not maybe in like a more academic realm haven't heard that before. I'm like, okay, your eyes are already glazing over. I've already lost you with these big words. You're like, I don't know what that means. And so I think about, again, there is theory and practice, there is practice and theory. But when you start talking about theory to people who don't generally talk about theory, again, if you're trying to make this accessible to like the everyday person, practitioner, does it feel like it's theirs? Do they feel ownership? Do they feel invitation to that conversation? So I think that's maybe what I was trying to get at a little more of in that kind of bridging, in that communicating of ideas. Is it presented in a way that is, like you're saying, hopefully not oversimplified, that you lose like the beauty, the richness of it, but is it accessible in a way that helps people to claim the ideas as something that they get to use or try on? And I think that's what makes me really interested in what you're doing with your book, which I'd love you to say a little more about, is because you've introduced 65 different methods. And so could you talk about what's that process that you're inviting people into that does say, hey, try these on and see what works for you, and that's the way to do it?
There's again many points I would like to have a point on. I could tell a story about the start of the research and when I discovered that I wanted to do this book. This has to do with an academic branch and a practitioner branch.
Please tell the story,
Yeah, and then I will go into the book and why it's important to have a systemic and a systematic approach. And I will go on that in the second one. So first, so I will when I did my courses and I'm always in the practice field, I figured, it's based on something. Yeah, when you design courses and do instructional design, you have certain values, beliefs, attitudes, skills, what it's based on. This should be the base. It's not the content. It's the base on is something more deep. And what it was typically based on was certain ways of thinking or being critical about certain things, because this was mainly scientists also I've been working with, and I'm still. So when I discovered, okay, this is good that I'm training that with the people, but maybe they want to do it themselves, or they want to have the tools, the methods, the approaches, the activities to do it themselves. That this is such a fundamental thing, and they have issues to access this whole field. And when the field of systems thinking, when we talked about that, because there is when you do your research, some two fields you can find. The one is the academic branch you were just slightly touching, and the one is more the practitioner branch. And in the academic branch academia is often about definitions. It's often about certain levels and meta levels and meta levels where people are discussing about, which totally makes sense in a scientific way, which then gets to language, which is so exclusive, going back to the word exclusive in a second, so that practitioners are excluded at some point when they just want to start. And systems thinking, I believe, is quite a large field to jump into. And when you first have to study for like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to actually get an idea about what it actually is, it's maybe too far of putting it into practice. So we are in the thinking scheme and not in the application scheme. And when I look at the practitioner side, it's also that there's brilliant methodologies and methods and all of these things out there. And there's also brilliant books about some of these things. If you need an explanation and read the whole book of 300 pages, then people are saying, maybe that's not the best way to start. It is useful, most likely, in a process to dive deeper if you really figure, that's the thing I want to do. But often it's a try out process. In a life you try out. So you have this certain situation, you start, you will think like, okay, that could be a fit. I would try for myself. I would try with my team. If it works out, great. Okay, that's the solution for the problem. If it doesn't work out, we try something else. And that's a bit of the approach I'm taking for this book. I did another publication before, and we structured it in a way that it's really, really accessible. Also cognitively, what does this mean? When we look at the page, I experience for myself. I sometimes, when I have methods books, the heading starts in the middle, the heading starts at the top. There's a picture in the left or the picture in the right, and this sometimes confuses. What it does, it adds a cognitive load, and when this is high, it gets more tricky to figure out where is standing what and what is the next step. And so I said, okay, well, we have to have this as structured as possible, as systematic as possible, because the people need this systematic way of like, okay, I do that as a start, as the first step, as I say, you can break all of these steps. This is totally fine, but line it out as steps. So this is the first thing I'm going to do, and this is explained. So direct instruction, explaining a bit about what is this all about? What are we going to do? This is what the people need. In a way, what is background, and then start through it step by step, and then find out in the process, or at the end of that, in after reflection, whether this worked for you or not. Anyway, you most likely learned something or went through the process this much that you say like, oh, it's working for us or not working for us. And I a bit bypassed the discussion about methods. Is this a systems thinking method or not? Yeah, because what I took as I did not grow in the systems thinking academic community. I'm as I say from outside, and they say, okay, I also have different disciplines coming in, and this would be education, this would be communication, learning, all of these different things, and engineering. And where I said, okay, this makes sense to put into this book, because what ultimately it should do, it should support the people in getting the work done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not the one who decides on whether this is systems is by definition, by a certain definition, which is hard in systems thinking, because there is certain things what people agree on. However, there's not a strict thing what people like to have, which is normal. But people can decide themselves and decide by the layout of the book, where I say, okay, I organize it by purpose. Yeah, you decide, oh, that's the purpose of this method and of the idea, so I would try it. Yeah, and that's a bit of about the story around it. It's always 3 pages. It's always the same layout, and you always find the same things on the same page, on the same. It's really, really systematically lined out step by step. Yeah, that's the trick behind it.
Yeah, that's really great to know. I think that probably does, serve the purpose you intended to make it. Again, I just keep going back to this word of like accessibility for people. And as you're speaking, it helps me to distill that, like, at the center of all of this work for me is this idea of choice. And do people feel like they have a choice when it comes to what they say, how they interact, how they decide to, communicate in a given moment, again, in my world of things, and then extending that to your world, in the systems they're designing or participating in. And I think that is so important to me because in truth, we are all always making choices. The question is whether we recognize it or not, because so much of how we have learned to communicate is just like osmosis, just like you just internalize what you're seeing other people do, your family, your peers, as you're growing up, and that's how you interact. That's how you talk to another person. That's how you argue. That's how you repair. That's how you, negotiate. And maybe that comes in more or less for people more or less, critically about like how they're internalizing. Is that actually a good or useful or effective way to communicate? And so I think that the choice element for me is so central, because that's the like trial and error, the try it on and then try something else, I think is like, is the only way in my eyes to create those better social worlds, to go back to that CMM-ish language of if we can all have the perspective that we are all always making choices, and the hope maybe that we're all trying to make the best choices for ourselves and for each other in terms of what we're building together, what we're co-creating, that then we can be a little more generous and a little more compassionate, maybe, that in an interaction, in a, whether it feels like just a small interaction or whether it feels like a conversation, that you're maybe aware of how it's creating the system or the social world. You're actively designing or building something together, making decisions in that way. Are you aware of the other person and your own ability to make choices and try out new things, and just see it as this almost like playful relationship, like making things together? I think one of my concerns with the language of, like, particularly in CMM, we talk about bifurcation points or critical moments that are, every moment is your ability to make a choice about what comes next, and you're creating your social worlds in the moment. And I fear that maybe is overwhelming to people because it puts so much pressure on every moment and every word, every interaction. But really, my hope is that it's empowering more so than overwhelming, to say that in every moment we're co-creating together, and we're all just making choices, and we're all just seeing what works, and we're all just making meaning together. And it's very emergent, and it's very improvisational, and it's very much about, let's try this thing out together and see what works, and let's have grace for each other if it doesn't get us the social world we wanted, if it doesn't design the system in the way we had wanted it to. So I think, just as you're speaking, I was reflecting on that language of choice and how that, for me, I think is the through line of so much of this. Hey, it's Abbie here, taking a pause in this conversation to invite you to reflect with me about how this episode is hitting you so far. If you're wanting to learn more about the coordinated management of meaning theory that I reference in this conversation, I'd recommend checking out the CMM Institute Substack for additional educational resources. If you're loving what you're hearing and are curious to learn more about CMM in different contexts, use the link in the show notes to follow the CMM Institute event page, where you can stay up to date with our monthly webinars hosted by yours truly. These events are an opportunity to gather with our community and explore CMM in different ways. And if you're looking to be even more connected, you can peruse our other CMM Institute initiatives, like our free social emotional learning resources, Cosmo Activities, which feature ways to engage all ages in conversations about building better social worlds. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes. As we turn toward the second half of this episode, I invite you to reconnect with your body and your environment. As the music plays to take us back to the conversation, take a breath, sink into your body wherever you are, take in your surroundings, and settle in for some more stories. Let's get back into it.
I would also comment on this word choice and selection, and about the subtitle of the book is exploring, as you said, exploring systems and perspectives, and this was all of the words you used already. And I would like to talk a bit about the word selection and choice, because when you have books or methods books, orientation again is important, and how to select or make a choice. It's for 65 methods. This might sound a lot. All the methods. I don't know if you have the same saying, but we have the saying there's a toolism. A tool is something different than a method. Nevertheless, there's something that there's many of these things out there. But what people again need is a bit of orientation, a bit of guidelines. And this is why I said, okay, why don't do buckets? Do a structure with what I call the 5M. And the 5M is motivate, meet, map, make, and manage. And then I sorted these methods into these buckets so that people have actually a chance to say, oh, is it now for, should I get the project started? Is actually the right motivation there for the project? Or is it mainly about engaging with stakeholders or visualizing things or like this. So to make it for people a bit more also accessible and an
Yeah.
idea
Yeah.
in what bucket they should and in what M in this point they should start and can start with, yeah, because they're free to start wherever they want to. It's just my interpretation where I believe this makes sense to put
Mm-hmm.
into this category. But they then have a better approach in the structure to actually start and where to find one place to start. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I think that's really helpful. And yeah, the subtitle of your book being Exploring Systems, Perspectives, and Complexity really is, yeah, it's capturing everything we're talking about. And I'm worrying that I'm maybe dipping into a little bit of a like, well, easier said than done when it comes to that playfulness, that exploration. And so I'm curious if you have any stories that come to mind for you of that exploration and what that's looked like for you, how you've witnessed that happening, to kind of give people an idea of what does it actually look like, rather than just, again, me sitting here being like, be playful, make choices, try things on. What have you seen that look like?
Yeah, I mean, you imagine a situation with your partner, or the listeners out there imagine a situation with the partner, and you say something and you get an answer, and this might be something different than what you would have expected. You have this in different theories that might again be psychology. This might be again in systems theories and many other things how people react. So you can't predict that
Mm-hmm.
what the answer will be. It's their own interpretation of the people. And so this is already an exploration. That's a play we're having. It's a game, basically, in a way like a communication game we're
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
playing, and you get a response, and then you do something with it. And this is what I mean with exploring. That together you can create something. However, you will find out that some things work out and some things don't work out. You find that there's certain responses what you figured or first thought this cannot happen, but then
Mm-hmm.
you realize it's going to happen. Yeah, basically that's what I mean with exploring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense to me. And I think something else that I'd like to say about that exploration, that trying things on, is that it's may often be a longer process. It might feel a little more sticky or challenging to, like, in a single conversation say, oh, that didn't work, let's try something different. But for me, I'm thinking about relationships that I've had, and it's really, maybe unique, maybe not unique. In my situation, that so much of my work communication is mediated online, because the people I work with are all around the world. And so I'm not
Mhm.
sitting in meetings looking at their faces and, reading their body language in a like we're in the same space kind of way. I'm doing it over Zoom or we're emailing. And so that's been a challenge on its own to me, to one, because there's the element of like cultural differences in a lot of ways. And I'm in a similar spot to what you described earlier, where very like the people I work with, it's a very intergenerational group. And so there's differences in
Mhm.
terms of expectations and generations, mentorship, learning, who's kind of teaching those different roles. And so for me, as I think about exploration in my own life and how I've tried to try different things on in my relationships, it's been over time. And it's been, oh, we just had this email exchange and I didn't really love kind of where we ended. Maybe I could have said something differently. I didn't, feel like they were understanding what I was saying. So maybe next time I'll try something different. So I just think about that for my own sense of like exploration too, that like, as you were saying, you are offering 65 methods, and that's a lot and might
Yeah.
feel like a lot to some people. But it's about like what I would say, like a reflexive process of like doing the thing and then thinking about how it went and reflecting on it and saying,
Yeah.
was that, what I wanted to make? Like those are the, I think really fundamental questions of CMM are these three questions of, how did this get made? What are we making? And what do we want to do to make better social worlds? I think that like having those questions on repeat in your mind, so that you're always, as you're making, thinking about what you're making, thinking about how you got where you are and where you want to go, is really useful for engaging in that exploration, again, as a like daily practice, that like you
Mm.
can just be a person, and in your relationship with your partner or with your parent
Mm.
or with your sibling or with your friend, this, extends beyond the work world. to interpersonal relationships to say, yeah, what are we making here? And what if I try on some of these things? So coming back to your systems methods, I wonder if you could shine a light on maybe one or two of them or stories that come to mind as you think
Yeah,
about the methods from this book that
sure.
you particularly like, or people have found helpful, or, whatever criteria you want
Yeah,
to use to kind of pluck a couple of them out.
sure, sure. Yeah, the first thing is like to just add on to your what you were saying and the exploration kind of thing. So the listeners and the people who are getting the book shouldn't get it in a way um, that there is not a structure. There's quite a lot of structure behind that. So
Yes.
there's always the methods are organized by the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So you always will find out, okay, that's the purpose, the intended purpose of the method. It always describes this is how it works and this is what the application areas are. So this is quite structured in that way that in the method you can explore together. That's where we make where we close the bracket with that one. And there's I would like to share a story, and I'm not telling which method, but there was one guy who was a reviewer of the book. And this person said, okay, I tried one of these methods with an indigenous community. And from outside, it really looked like chaos. Christian, it really looked like chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And the people loved it. And this was about, and you can find out yourself in the book, this was
Mm-hmm.
about hidden connections that you couldn't see
Yeah.
from the outside what was actually the agenda the people had, or what they were going after, or what their job was. And after some time, they figured there's a pattern was evolving, or some people were stuck, and that's the part where you then step out of the activity, start to speak about it and start to reflect about it, what actually happened, and then you have all the bits together and say like, okay, this is the feelings which were there, and this is what actually happened, and this is what then later what we can learn from. So the reflection part is a really really important thing. But that was one story about that, what one reviewer just used and told me, and that was quite nice to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And there's many other. I use the words many other activities. Yeah, I use the word methods because you have to name something in the book, and I clarified in the book that there's also different distinctions you can do. This one is methods, then there's methodologies, there's frameworks, there's activities, there's tools, and they're all something different. But this is the term I used in the book as methods to have it boiled down a bit, because if you get overly detailed again, you lose the connection.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things on all of these methods are used in my trainings, and I'm not sure whether there's one which is a favorite one, because all are again for different purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And we could just have a little walkthrough just through a couple,
Yeah.
which would be before you're starting a project, you first should decide whether you actually want to act. Yeah, because at some
Yeah.
place, yeah, you say we want to start the project, but is it actually worth? Is all of the
Yeah. Right.
things put together, etc. So this would be deciding to act as a method. You might access if the whole organization, the whole structure, the whole social system is ready for it. Yeah, that's also an assessment. So the readiness assessment you can do before, which will be in the motivation
Mm-hmm.
stage. And I'm really trying to get back to a funny story, which would be interesting for the listeners to tell, because there's some of the methods I really, really regularly use, and this is almost in every training. And this is like I called it in the book life mapping. Somebody would say it's a 3D mapping, which
Mm-hmm.
is basically people standing around and they're connected by a thread. So all of this people have a different they are a different stakeholder, or they are a different production step, or they are some depending on the situation. Yeah, um, and we're then simulating what does it do when one of these stakeholders is missing. What does the thread do and what does it do with myself? And you can physically experience it. Or if there's something coming from outside, you can take this and bring it to sustainability or to some other topics. And you will see like, okay, well, there is outside world and the world is putting pressure, or there's more temperature, there's something else coming. And people can feel it. And the activity is there to make actually to actually do it, because what we often have in academia still is the overemphasis on information.
Yeah,
And the information is a important part. It's not for learning the most crucial part. So what now in learning, what the cognitive science says in the modern theories is that it's influencing the long-term memory. And you need a bit of information when you design activities, but you also need the action. Yeah, you need the application and you need the transfer
right.
into the training and also into your daily life, which is the most important steps that you actually can make the transfer from the training. Otherwise, it's just like information playing. Yeah. So therefore, the activity is quite important to actually experience it and to say like, okay, I felt it, and then okay, let's transfer now this activity into our daily life, and see what it does. So therefore, this is important.
Yeah, I love you bringing us back to this idea that I try to kind of reiterate. I probably in all my podcast episodes, it comes up in one way or another. To just say, when I'm talking about communication, I'm not just talking about talking. That there's so many different ways to communicate together and make meaning together. And I did a podcast last year with someone named Tom Watkin, who has a company called D&D at Work. I don't know if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, but it's a role-playing game. And there's been all kinds of research that says like the body, the mind remembers role-playing experiences as real for, all intents and purposes. And so there is something really valuable to me in, again, invitation's another important word to me, inviting people into an experience or an activity that engages them in a way that is not, hey, I'm going to stand on this stage, you're going to sit in that chair, and I'm going to tell you what this system is doing. But actually, let's get up, let's connect ourselves with a physical thread, let's represent these different things, and let's feel together in the space.
Absolutely. How
the system is working, and let's make that meaning. Let's communicate in this way that engages more of us, And
that's you can apply those things to almost every situation in your team. If you have conflicts, if you have technical things, and then sometimes you have this hesitation, but you can't do this in our company, it's too serious. And then people the first time will be like, this won't be working for us. And it's like, give it a try. And then after the first minutes, people are like, actually, this totally makes sense, because you're going away from the only cognitive approach. And the one is just information. But to make learning, there's way more steps in processing and making sense out of that. So information is not learning. So therefore, that's an important step. Depending on what you want to transport. And this is for if you want to co-create, if you want to do things together, if you want to have a look what the different perspectives of the other people are. And this is often necessary in these messy situations, that you have these different perspectives, and therefore it's good.
Yeah. The other thing that's become important to me as, again, one of many ways to make meaning together is metaphors. And not just, we just talked about kind of, the physical play, but also the linguistic play of how are we understanding something together. And so I love the idea of, I love the practice of talking about metaphors together with people, because again, the point of CMM is that to draw people's attention to the meaning making process, because it's something that gets taken for granted. So, maybe we're sharing the experience of this conversation right now, but maybe we're making different meaning out of it. We definitely are making different meaning out of it, because we're different people coming out of different contexts, which we, hit on a little bit with that, how are you arriving question. And so I think something like a metaphor, something like, what does that mean to you? Or how are you thinking of that? Like, great questions to overcome that gap between, hey, we're probably making different meaning right now, but it doesn't have to be a mystery. Let's, speak about this together. And so I wonder if there's any metaphors for systems or systems thinking from your book, or just from, all the other work that you do that's you might want to share right now as terms of something you might feel like is helpful for people as a way to think about systems?
Um, I described this a bit in the book. The first, what is systems and what is systems thinking, and it comes back to the things I said in the beginning, like a bit of a toolbox for thinking. Yeah, there's no right or wrong. There's different ways of thinking, and to go from the thinking into activity, methods help, and this book is basically a toolbox
Mm-hmm.
for enabling that. Yeah, so you have the thinking toolbox, and then you have the practical approaches you can just jump into. You don't need any prior knowledge. You can either study the theory, or you can just jump into the methods
Mm-hmm.
and then get it going. And you said something I would also like to add on. It was you said meaning and making meaning and making it meaningful, which is really an important thing. If you um, make a thought experiment and say like, okay, when is the last time I went into a training, I went into a learning session, and that it was actually meaningful to you? Then typically it's quiet, yeah, and then people think,
Mm-hmm.
um, and there's this, if it's not meaningful to you, you most likely won't remember, you
Right.
won't keep it with you. And so it's always like also the ends of trainings. You have to make
Yeah.
it meaningful in a way that you go to the emotions of the
Mm-hmm.
people. So if it sparks emotions, then um yeah, it was most likely meaningful for you at some
Mm-hmm.
point. Yeah, in a way, whatever these emotions are. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that, like, you have all these different methods. You could have all these different metaphors for what a system looks like. And I think it's important for people within their own systems to probably come up with that. Like I said, you can, it's a helpful tool for communicating the meaning that's being made, to say, oh, this is like this for me. And
Yeah.
to make meaning that way. One thing that's coming to mind, just knowing your engineering background, is that I've got a couple cousins who are engineers who also have young children. And I got them, both of them, this book called Computer Engineering for Babies. And it's a very
Mm.
cute, like, board book that you open up and it shows like a system. And so there's the button and it shows, okay, that when you press the button, the light comes on, and then you
Mm.
flip to the next page. Okay, when you press the button, the light turns off. When you press these two buttons at the same
Mm.
time, then the light turns on. So it's demonstrating, all these different
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah.
And I just think it was a cute little book for me, who is not an engineer, that I was like, oh, this is probably very cool. But also, if you have a deeper understanding like you do
Yeah.
of some of those systems, I think that that's probably a useful metaphor
Yeah.
as well. And
Mhm.
again,
Absolutely.
you could pick one that works, but also keep all of them in mind, to say there are many different systems. And sometimes you do this and it has this reaction. And sometimes you do these two things and it creates that
Yeah.
reaction, or it has the opposite effect. And so thinking of your system in terms of like an electrical system, like I know you referenced that in just the introduction to your book, of like, oh, it's like a simple light switch. Like that's kind of what, made me think about this
Mm.
book that I got, that like there are, to get back to the language of simplicity and complexity, I guess, there are more simple and more complex systems, and they're
Mm.
all systems. And so, like, I think, to come a little full circle to, I was talking earlier about just like the handshake happening between
Mhm.
interpersonal communication and systems thinking, is it's relevant everywhere and in every space, I think.
Mhm. Um, I just noted down some things as well, and this one example in the book I also described was a car repair shop, and
Yeah.
that would be maybe an interesting thing. And the other, um, the thing you described before is visualization, and there's visualizations in the book as well. So you have your engineering for babies, yeah, you figure it out, and when we visualize things and do painting or write it down on a
Mm-hmm.
piece of paper, and it makes us or build a model. And so this is often really really helpful if we do it for ourselves and the other person also does it for themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
then we compare and see, okay, well, this is our perception of how things play out or should play out, or how we
Mm-hmm.
think
Mm-hmm.
about this whole thing. And visualization is already a great starting point, because we perceive the situation differently, and then
Yeah,
we can
right.
so this is also in some of the methods. And then I will what I have in the book, and maybe your question was going to is a bit like our perception of a system. which is maybe different at different points.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote about an example of the car repair shop. And the car repair shop is like, okay, if you take different people, they might perceive the situation different and the system different.
Mm-hmm.
So for a customer, this all really seems like super simple. You bring your car, it's get fixed, you get it back,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's all fine. Yeah. For the mechanic, yeah, it's they have diagnosis, they have the repairs, the procedures, they have for the screws they have to be fixed in the right way, safety standards, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So they it's maybe not that simple. It's getting maybe a bit more complicated, and then there's the shop manager for schedules and stuff and all of that, or the someone who's managing the software, and they all have a different perspective and might perceive the system as complicated,
Mm-hmm.
really, really complicated,
Right,
as really
right.
simple or really complex. And often, so when people are involved a lot, then it gets complex quite fast. If it's mainly machines, then it's mostly really, really, really complicated. And nevertheless, that people can think about that and think about
Mm-hmm.
themselves, whether they perceive it as really simple or as complex, and make their own meaning out of that. When it's people involved and there's many things coming together, it's getting
Mm-hmm.
complex, as you say. Yeah. But who the people can decide themselves, yeah, what they how they perceive the situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that question of perception is so important
Yeah.
for the meaning that's being made and recognizing that. So I appreciate you bringing us back there. As we're kind of wrapping up, I'm hoping you'll indulge me in this question, which I hope we can answer without slipping into oversimplicity, but just a framing I like to use as stories, as you know. And so I find it useful to you can hold on to this language more or less as you answer, but framing in terms of like a new story or an old story or a changing story, at least. And so I'm curious because, as we've talked about, and as I alluded to earlier, I've had a lot of conversations with systems thinkers, and there's as many systems thinkers as there are. That's how many systems perspectives there are. You know, everybody's got their own relationship to it. And so I'm just curious in terms of maybe those CMM-ish questions I mentioned earlier of like, how did this get made and what are we making going forward? I'm curious with this book and with the work that you do, what is like the story that you are hoping to tell or be a part of as a next turn in the stories that already exist in the world of systems thinking, as being in opposition to a quote unquote old story, something you're hoping to change, or however you let me know what the correct kind of relationship there is. But what's the story that you're hoping to be a part of with the work that you're
Mm,
doing?
mm. Yeah. I wouldn't. I would. I'm not in opposition at all. I think everything what is out there and everything what you throw at me, we can use and we can use for
Mm-hmm.
for learning, and what also with people in academia or in practice, yeah, we can use. And this work and the work I do should be a useful for you, useful at that situation, a useful add up and add on, where you can say, okay, it's actually helpful because the
Mm-hmm.
people you sometimes they're getting bombarded with certain things
Mm-hmm.
and then it's getting too much. This is an invitation to be useful, an invitation to support your daily work, and you are the only one deciding yourself whether this
Mm-hmm.
is useful to you or not, whether this
Right.
is complete or not complete, and that will be the story of use it if it's helpful and leave it away if it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Add something and write me an email that you want to have this added. That's perfect because this is evolving and that's it should be therefore to work with. Yeah, and it's a workbook. It's
Mm-hmm.
made for the desk to use every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful story to be a part of. And just as we wrap up, last kind of chance, is there anything that you would want to leave me with as we wrap up this conversation?
That's a good question. Let me think about it.
Please take a moment.
explore, have fun, enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be the last words. Enjoy, have fun, and explore together, and create the better or the systems you would like to see in the future.
Yep, ditto. I agree. That's a great place to end on. So thanks, Christian. Thanks so much for your time and for your perspective and for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Abbie, for having me.
Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. You can email questions, reflections, ideas, and stories to storieslived.storiestold@gmail.com for a chance to be featured in an episode. You can comment on our Instagram at Stories Lived, Stories Told Pod, or the CMM Institute YouTube page to engage with other listeners. And you can subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to make sure you're getting every episode right in your inbox. Links to all these places can be found in the show notes for this episode. Other ways you can support this podcast are by following, rating, and reviewing the show wherever you listen. Plus, please share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution, an organization dedicated to furthering the coordinated management of meaning theory and practice of communication. More information about CMM can be found at cmminstitute.substack.com. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told. Okay, that is all for today's episode, but remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. You can email questions, reflections, ideas, and stories to storieslived.storiestold@gmail.com for a chance to be featured in an episode. You can comment on our Instagram at Stories Lived, Stories Told Pod, or the CMM Institute YouTube page to engage with other listeners. And you can subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to make sure you're getting every episode right in your inbox. Links to all these places can be found in the show notes for this episode. Other ways you can support this podcast are by following, rating, and reviewing the show wherever you listen. Plus, please share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution, an organization dedicated to furthering the coordinated management of meaning theory and practice of communication. More information about CMM can be found at cmminstitute.substack.com. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.